Hello, everyone, and welcome to another video discussion. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Bjorn Rebergen, founder of Paddock Paradise Academy in the Netherlands. Bjorn specializes in designing and constructing Paddock Paradise track systems for private and professional horse owners, collaborating with various contractors, green engineers, fencing companies, land architects, etc. They design and construct Paddock Paradise systems, mainly in the Netherlands, a challenging country with its many regulations, densely populated areas, and flat, wet, and green ecosystems. Recently, he initiated the Paddock Paradise Academy, where he offers a training program for natural hoof care professionals and various other training opportunities for private horse owners. His official website, paddockparadiseacademy.com, will be available shortly for further information. Bjorn started his training with Jamie Jackson in 2004 and worked closely with him until 2022. He has been working as a field instructor for mentorship for the Association for the Advancement of Natural Horse Practices since 2007. And in 2012, he initiated Jamie Jackson's program in Europe and the Middle East as a training program clinician for the Institute for the Study of Natural Horse Care Practices. His deepest passion, however, lies in the care and understanding of the equine hoof. Bjorn has been working as a hoof care practitioner since 2005, and to quote his beautiful words, "There is nothing a RASP can do that the environment couldn't do better. It's crucial to change the environment of the horse and all that's in it in order to cultivate healthy, sound hooves and horses. The evolution of Equus scabulus and our understanding of its biology holds a blueprint for genuine horse care. Like any organism, the horse too favors a specific ecosystem, something I believe is widely misunderstood or ignored by both private horse owners, equine professionals, and academia. Only when we come to a mutual understanding on what a horse is and how it operates naturally, we can truly end the needless suffering that takes place. To quote the mission of the AANHCP, to cause no harm and advance the humane care and management of domestic equines worldwide through the application of principles and practices based on the research and findings of wild, free, roaming horses."
Beautiful. It's a mouthful.
All right, so thank you everyone for taking time out of your busy lives to listen to this video discussion. I think it's going to be very interesting. And thank you, Bjorn. I think everybody will benefit greatly from what they're about to hear.
I hope so.
So, what is so wrong, in your opinion, with conventional stable systems and how things have been done up to this time?
Well, what is so wrong? It's always dangerous to tell someone that they're wrong about something. I think it's important that first we realize how we got to that place when we're talking about traditional livery and traditional boarding systems. And the reason we got there is because our environment changed, and with it, the environment of the horse changed. And when you look at it from the perspective of the horse, from their biology, and if you're honest about it, then the only thing that you can conclude is that they're animals of movement, that they live in group formats, they live in herds or bands. They're always together, they're always on the move, they're always foraging. And when you look at the horse in its natural state, in environments that really fit the species, then you see that they're absolutely healthy. They're very, very vital. The vitality in these animals is amazing. And then when you look at the horse, the confined horse, of which we have 65 to 70 million worldwide, you see a lot of problems. We see laminitis, we see lameness issues, we see colics, we see ulcers. We see a lot of problems that the wild horse doesn't have. And then people will say, well, my horse is not wild. And they're right, their horse isn't. But their horse is a direct descendant of the wild horse. And the wild horses that we find in the world today are basically descendants of all domesticated horses. So, you know, as a species, they've evolved to something that is very durable and something that works. And then we come in, we change their environment, and things start to fall apart. So I think it's something that we have to look at and be honest about. And I understand it's difficult to change your ways, especially if you've been doing something all your life. You know, when I started riding when I was 5 or 6 years old, I went to a traditional livery yard with traditional riding practices, traditional livery practices. You know, the horses got fed 2 or 3 times a day. They're in a stable for 12 hours. They're all wearing shoes, et cetera, et cetera. When you get into that as a child or a young person, that's all you know. And I was lucky enough to, you know, learn something else. I think it's valuable to all horse owners, but I understand it's difficult.
When you said that the horses nowadays are still descendants of wild horses, you mean that even the horses that are now like labeled as wild or feral horses, they are not wild either. They are domestic horses that were brought to the United States.
Well, you find horses all over the world, both domesticated and wild. And the fact that we find them everywhere is the result of domestication, because we domesticated the horse and then brought them wherever they went. But technically speaking, from a scientific point of view, when you look at the classification of the horse, and you can easily find this on Wikipedia or wherever, then all horses, including the wild horses, are no longer considered wild. This is why they're named Equus caballus and no longer Equus ferus ferus, because that was the genuine wild horse. But in essence and technically, they're the same horse. The only difference is that at some point, all wild horses came into the hands of man, therefore they've become domesticated.
Yes, and this is very interesting distinction, because when you are having a debate, especially when it comes to hoof care, somebody will tell you, well, these studies were done in wild horses, and my horse is not wild, it's a domestic animal. But you go and tell them, well, there were no wild horses anymore. And when Columbus went to the United States, he brought domestic horses that were already living in stables and were shod probably. And then these horses were, they escaped, and then they bred, and they now became the Mustangs that we go and study their hooves, and
exactly
can learn a lot of things from them.
And then if you move in on that a little further, and you look at the Mustang, you find the Mustang all over the US, but not every ecosystem in the United States is the same. So if you're on the west side of the Rocky Mountains, you have a completely different ecosystem than when you're on the east side. So the Mustangs that you'll find from east to west will show differences as well, also in terms of health.
Yeah.
So there is, like with any organism, I think there is an optimum environment in which it can live. And for the horse, apparently that's a semi-arid environment. This is where they've evolved in, and this is where they do best. But the horse is, in that sense, a bit of a complicated animal, because they can manage pretty much anywhere. You feed them a little bark, they're probably okay. You put them on lush grass, they'll be okay for some time. You feed them hay, you can feed them all sorts. They're true survivors. You find them in islands, in deserts, you find them in tropical rain, you find them anywhere. But you have to understand that the reason they're there is because we brought them there. It doesn't mean that they actually belong there. I think there's a big difference. And also, like I just said, we have like, I think 60, 70 million horses worldwide. And of these horses, only a fraction is actually living in the wild. Maybe 1.5 million is living in the wild, of which most live in Australia. So there's small populations in Africa, small populations in the US, and then there's some other countries. But we actually, when it comes to the model of the wild horse, it's very small. We don't have a lot to look at.
Here in Greece, we have a lot of free roaming horses. Some of them are, under the responsibility of some owner, where he gets some money from the state, which come from the European Union or whatever. But there are also totally wild horses. What about in your country? Do you have bands of horses that live?
Yeah. Yes, there's wild horses in the Netherlands. Well, feral horses. They've been introduced there. But I think you need to make a clear distinction between the various wild horses. Like I said, not all environments are alike. And when you look at the wild horses in, for example, the Netherlands, we have in the north, we have a group of Koning horses. I had a tour there many years ago with one of the managers, and from what I was told at the time, they had like 1,000 horses there on about 300 hectares, and of this 300 hectares, only a small part was available to the horses because the rest was too wet. But of this population, there is a population loss of 30% each year.
Why is that?
Well, it's because they're in an environment that doesn't suit them. So during the summer, you see they're getting too much grass and they get very fat. And then during the winter, they lose too much weight because there's not enough forage for them. And because they've created this natural environment, the horses are not being fed. So there's all sorts of problems there. And there's been all sorts of protests for years going on here in the Netherlands about that whole project because it doesn't make any sense. So again, you need to make a clear distinction between the environment in which this wild horse that you speak of is living, because not all environments are suitable as a model. You see wild horses, most of the wild horses you find in Australia. And Australia is a huge continent, but the horse is not native to Australia. It has never lived there in any way, shape, or form. And then when you look at the Brumbies in Australia, some are doing pretty good, and a lot of them are doing not so well. And that has to do with the environment that they're living in.
Yes, I think I read somewhere, it was many years ago. I think his name was Brian
Hampson.
Yes, and he did this research, and he also found laminitis and colics and pathology in these horses that were labeled as wild, but probably, as you say, they were living in conditions that they wouldn't choose by themselves to live in.
Well, I don't know. You put a horse on the grass and they'll start eating the grass. That's what they do. But again, the problem is we take them out of what is natural for them, put them somewhere else, and then things start to happen. The Hampson research, which he did with Professor Pollitt, who's a renowned laminitis researcher, in my opinion, that was a very flawed research because first of all, the researchers were not qualified to research the things they were researching. That's one. And second, there were many holes in the whole thing. And it appeared like that whole project was just set out to discriminate the wild horse model. Because basically, when you look at that project and the outcome of that project, the only conclusion you can draw is that the wild horse model is not a worthy model. But the reason for that is they were looking at horses that are living in an environment that doesn't fit the species. And this is a giant problem because then, anything goes and you won't have a clear representation of what the horse is. So I can imagine, for example, if you're in Greece and if you're in some sort of a semi-arid environment where there's, a little grass and there's a lot of space and, the soil is real abrasive and rocky, that you can get a lot of good results. but in terms of health, but to say it is their natural environment just because they're there, that's a very tricky statement to make. Because like I said, the horses evolved in a very specific environment.
Yeah, that's very interesting point of view. So I think we'll get back to this later on. But so to summarize, everything wrong with conventional stable is that it deprives the horse of movement, deprives the horse of social interaction, and its natural instinct to play, to graze, which is an activity that the horse goes in for 16 to 18 hours a day. And that's also something psychological, not just for nourishment and nutrition. And I just want to ask you, is it true that in Netherlands it is now forbidden to own just one horse?
I think in theory it is. I think in paper it is. It's written.
Yeah.
I think, but it's not being enforced.
Yeah.
Because every day when I go home, there's always the same horses I see. They're standing out there alone. So in terms of enforcement, it's meaningless.
And why is that? Is it that you are prohibited from having just one animal, but it doesn't mean that you couldn't have one stable in one box and then the other one in the other side of the building? The point was to have them together where they could smell each other, touch each other.
Yes, but then I think there's people that just, they have one horse. They may have owned just the one horse for many years. But there's so many contradictions in this because you can only have, all right, so you have a horse and then the law says you need to have multiple horses. Okay, but then what about these livery yards where they're pushed in a stable and they stand there alone for 12 or 20 hours a day? Then basically they're still alone, although they're together in this huge livery stable. It's I think it's from a law enforcement point of view, I'm thinking it's complex, but I haven't really looked into the details of it. What I see is I know that there's rules about it, but I don't see it being enforced.
Okay.
Unfortunately.
Here in my country, you will see a lot of horses being stabled in isolation. And that includes usually private horse owners. Of course, there is riding schools as well, but mainly a common practice is that they will have the horse outside, but they will have it on a short rope or maybe a long rope tied to a pole. So the horse can go, round and around, and then they come back in, 2 or 3 days, they fill up the water and they take it somewhere else. If someone is a little bit mindful, he might tie the horse under a tree, but usually the horse is just tied in an open field. And that's the common practice.
And it was common practice not too long ago here as well.
Yeah.
The farmers here would do it. I would regularly see it when I was a child. It was normal. But now you won't see it as much anymore. Maybe the occasional pony or donkey, they'll tie him to a post, but very rarely.
Yeah.
See, I think I've been lucky enough to travel to quite a few countries with this job that I have. And you see things everywhere. And there's no country that is better or worse. We all have our problems, and I think a lot of it is based on culture as well. And some cultures are in a different, they operate in a different direction than others, or they might be behind on something, others might be ahead on something. But seriously, I see various problems everywhere, and it's not good for the horse, but I think we need a lot of time to change these things. So your questions are very relevant. How do you get the horse owner to understand that what they're doing uh, doesn't make sense or isn't too good for the horse.
Yeah, I told you about this because you described the situation where the horse might be outside, but is still deprived of his natural behaviors and instinct because he's still alone when you just tie him on a pole and he goes around and around all day and he's still not moving a lot, and
Yeah.
his diet is still unnatural for him because he can only pick a small variety of legumes and grass when he's tied to a certain point that you picked. He didn't
Yeah.
pick this. So what's the deal with Paddock Paradise? I mean, imagine that you're talking to people who have no idea uh, what it is about. So if you could explain uh, how it came about, who thought about it, and what were his influences or his research, and the whole story.
Okay, I'll try. Um, so for those, like you just said in your introduction, I went through training with Jamie Jackson. Jamie Jackson is an American former farrier who, at some point in time, um, decided that he wanted to research wild horses in his country. And the reason for this was that he came across some things that were really puzzling to him. And one of these things was that he had a client who owned a horse, a Mustang, that was fresh off the reserve of the herd management area, and the feet of that horse were, as he describes, were amazing. They were looking so well. Mm-hmm. And as a farrier, of course, he would run into a lot of problems, and basically the same problems that we and farriers run in today. And those problems are the result, we know now, of the way these horses are living. So he ventured into wild horse country at some point. This was during the early 80s. And from 1982 to 1986, for 4 years, he would go into wild horse country, observe the horses, and study their feet. And he studied their feet by because there's these roundups in the HMAs. So these horses are gathered, brought in, and then tied down and branded and vaccinated, whatever they do. So that was a point in time where he had a moment where he could measure their feet and document what was there. So from this derived this whole system of how you can trim the foot, this whole method and philosophy of how you can care and maintain the feet. But also from his observations, of course, he would see that these horses are always on the move. They live in this giant bubble, which they don't leave, and they stay there and they follow these paths that lead through an environment that is very difficult. It's very static. There's rocks and boulders, and the soil is made up of lava crush and all sorts of stuff you wouldn't go on barefoot. And these horses were dancing and prancing around on all these surfaces and moving around in group format and creating all these little paths throughout wild horse country. And from this, came his eventually, because you have to understand he was a farrier, so he went through a process himself. This is not something that happens overnight. You're out there every day trimming and shoeing horses, doing the best you can, thinking you're a professional at what you do, and then you encounter the wild horse in its natural state and you're like, what the F is going on? Everything goes sideways because everything is different. Everything you learn it doesn't resonate anymore. So you need to go through this process and you need to learn to understand what it is you're looking at. And of course, in his case also, it took some time for him to, come up with something that actually works. And Paddock Paradise is an idea that he coined at some point. He wrote a book in 2006. And basically it's a template where you simulate the movements or the traveling that the horse does in the wild. So when you put it in really simple terms, if you have a field, you put a track around the field, put the horses on the track, spread some food, and what will happen is that the horses start to move along this track, finding their food, and you know they're together, they're constantly moving. So then in essence, you have what is a paddock paradise track system. But of course, it's a little more complex than that because there's a lot of things that go into it. So the type of soil you're on, the amount of horses you have, the amount of space you create, because you don't just want to create a track because that's just going to cause stress. They need open areas where they can hang out and
Yeah.
feed and that sort of thing.
And I'm going to ask you a lot of questions about that. So sorry for interrupting you, but if I understood it correctly, Jamie Jackson noticed that horses in the wild, they do not roam wherever and randomly, but they still follow specific tracks or specific paths so that they have, for example, a specific route where they know this is the route to the water, and then they never venture too far away from that. So the paddock paradise is a way of imitating this vast system of paths, which is obviously is enormous in the wild, and integrating that into a smaller model in your own backyard, right?
Yes, it's a simulation, and people need to make a clear distinction between that. They shouldn't think that paddock paradise is something natural, or that by creating a paddock paradise you're putting the horse back into nature or something like that.
It's as close to nature as you can get it.
Yes, and whatever you see the horses do is not natural behavior. It is more natural behavior.
Yes.
And there is a difference because things in the wild are much different. And I always say this to people, to all horse owners, it's if you ever have a chance to get on a plane and go to the United States Great Basin, and even if you don't see any horses, just being in that environment and walking around there and seeing what it's like is an absolute eye-opener. It's like a pilgrimage almost.
But in reality, I think we wouldn't want it to be extremely natural. Like I sometimes go against the radical people who are only voting for natural, because when you have a horse under your responsibility, you cannot let nature take its course every time. I mean, not studied, but I've spent some time with wild horses in Mount Olympus here in Greece. And if you watch the herd, then you will see that around February or March, the horses are starving. You can see their bones showing in the ribs showing in the rib cage, and you can see horses that are missing ears and they're lame, and this one goes.
Okay, but this is going back to what I just said.
Yeah.
That if you look at wild horses and if you want to use them as an example,
yeah,
you have to be very clear on the environment that they're in, and if that environment is not their natural adaptive environment, then you might run into things that are also not natural. Now,
sure.
You were talking about ears being damaged. When you look at the wild horse in its wild state, there's a lot of scar tissue there because wild horses love to fight.
Yeah, have you seen this documentary, The Cloud?
Oh, many years ago, yes.
Yeah, and there was this instance where the stallion comes in, sees a baby, and he just stomps it to death. This foal could be your own foal, and if you were the owner and responsible, you wouldn't allow that to happen, or you'd use antibiotics or medicine, and you stitch some wound. So, I mean, we have to regulate this natural influence when we're trying to do the best for our horses.
Absolutely. Well, I think stallions in particular, I mean, they're a great driver of natural behavior, and they're an integrated part of horse society. But it's virtually impossible to keep them in a domesticated situation. I've had them myself. I've had
Yeah.
a large group of horses where stallions and mares were all together, and it was all very peaceful. And it was, I've seen foals being born with stallions gathered around very respectfully. It's a beautiful thing. I mean, I think what you've seen is it's highly unusual, but it probably happens. I don't know. But there you must make a distinction that stallions are a different breed. They're full of testosterone. They have only one obligation, that is to reproduce, and they will go at length to get what they want. And if you put a couple of stallions together, they're going to fight it out. And the problem is, the moment you put them in an enclosed environment, which is also a paddock paradise, then depending on the size, one stallion probably won't be able to go away and get away from the other stallion. They will always be in each other's vicinity. So, of course, there's limitations and restrictions to having a paddock paradise track system. But I think, in essence, if you think about the design, if you think about the amount of land you have available, the amount of horses you put on there, and if you implement the right things, you can have a very peaceful environment where horses can thrive. And this is the objective. We want to make things better. We don't want to we don't want to turn your backyard into the natural environment of the horse. It's not possible.
Mm-hmm.
It's not possible.
So,
but I do think is that the closer you stay to the biology of the horse, the easier things get. And the further away you move from their biology, the more complicated it gets.
yeah,
It's as simple as that.
and the more pathology you see.
The more pathology you see. And the more action you get on that pathology, because you see a lot of the things that are being done are a reaction to this pathology. There's a symptom, and we respond to it. Laminitis is not a disease of the foot. It's a symptom. In the foot, it's a symptom, but it's a metabolic disease.
I agree 100%.
Good.
So you touched on this a little bit. So it's the big question everybody asks. It has to do with how much space and how much money is it required to build something like that in a horse owner's backyard.
I find that a very difficult question to answer, because in recent years, we've created quite a few track systems in people's literally in people's backyards. And sometimes you come to a location and people ask you to create something there, and you're looking at it, you're thinking, well, I don't know if this is possible. And then you start to think about it, and you're like, okay, if I can create enough space for these animals to move and get out of each other's way, then we can make something. As a rule of thumb, I would say 6 to 8 horses per hectare, as a rule of thumb. But in reality, we can do a lot more on a smaller amount of acreage. But again, it depends very much on what type of soil do you have. If you're also asking about the money. If you're on clay, for example, that means you have to bring in a material to keep the tracks dry. That's expensive. So, and then it changes something about that particular piece of land that is more or less permanent, which could be an obstruction. So there's all these factors that come into play when you're thinking about this, implementing this track system. And I find it difficult to give you a price on it. Also, because you're in Greece, I'm in the Netherlands. It probably doesn't make sense to compare. Here in the Netherlands, if we want to have a substrate on a track, if we want to create some sort of pebbles material, you know, we don't have that in the ground. You might have it in the ground in Greece, so it might be way cheaper for you to get it than for me. I don't know.
We have
That
it,
makes
but
sense.
it's
We don't have any
almost
corgis.
illegal to get. Some people manage to get it because usually they get this pig gravel from rivers or beaches,
Right.
and it's not legal to get it, to acquire it. So some people have managed to get it, knowing the right people.
And what about the crush from construction sites?
Well, this usually is very sharp, so I normally don't recommend this to the horse owner who wants to use some kind of footing because it has this sharp edges. The optimum is to get these round, small pebble stones that come from rivers or from some
Well, that
beaches in Greece that they have big
I
gravel.
I can see why you would advise that, but then when you look at the conformation of the hoof, which is all horn, and when you look at their natural environment, the stones and pebbles they find there are not very round. They're usually quite sharp. But then when you're that doesn't mean you can just throw anything in there. You have to take some things into consideration. But when you look at the crush that you get from construction sites or buildings being demolished, there's usually a filter system that they use to make the crush smaller and smaller. So if you can have a really fine sediment, then it could be very suitable for the horse's foot.
Yes.
Going back to your question in terms of size.
Yeah, I want to ask what is a hectare? Because here in Greece we use square meters.
A hectare is, I think,
or square kilometers. Sorry.
A hectare is like square kilometers. Don't ask me this right now. A hectare is 100 by 100 meter.
Yeah.
Again, it would. We've put. I have to be very careful with what I'm telling you here because people will take it up as advice. I know of a place where they've put 40 horses on 1 hectare. Personally, I would never do that.
Yeah.
We created an environment there. I have to go back a little because we were called in to do something about that. They had a track system, but it wasn't working. It was all mud, it was all clay. Horses were knee deep in the mud. It was a disaster. So they asked us to fix that, and we did. But when we started, I was a little reluctant because I was looking at the number of horses that were living on that 1 hectare. And I was like, geez, this is way too many horses. This can't be right. But to have them in the mud is no solution either. So we went to work. We created a new track with the right surfacing, and all these 40 horses went in there. And I have to say, the way they interact with one another, it's all very relaxed. Probably because there are so many horses, because the horses have so many individuals to choose from. Things somehow become very relaxed. Now, I can't be sure if there aren't any underlying stressors that might impact these horses, but from what I've seen, it worked very well.
Yes. But for example, we have one mare in our establishment, and I believe she was raised in a place with very harsh conditions, referring to, for example, starvation or a lot of competition, where she had to fight to get some bite of food. And even though we feed in a lot of different places, we put the hay nets and there's a lot of space, she would sometimes leave her own spot, just go to chase the other mares away. She's very competitive and very
some horses need a lot
argumentative.
Of time. Yeah.
Even though it's been so long.
Some horses need a lot of time to get rid of their old habits or trauma or whatever.
Yeah.
But getting back to what I was just saying, those 40 horses on 1 hectare, which is 10,000 square meters, I would never advise that.
Yeah.
It's not what you're looking for. If you have 1 hectare, I would say do 6, 7 horses, something like
Mhm.
that. That's a beautiful number.
And
There's a
about
lot.
the uh,
If money is not an issue, there's a lot of things you can do to a
mhm.
piece of land. If money is not an issue, and if you don't have to worry about what the landscape looks like, if no councils are breathing down your neck about what you're doing, then a lot is possible. But in general, I would say 6 to 8 horses per 10,000 square meters.
And what about the length of the track? I mean, is it does it have to do with how many horses you have? Like if you have 5 horses, as you say, how wide should the track be?
The width can vary. Uh, Generally speaking, you wouldn't want it any wider than like 4 or 5 meters, because the moment you widen it too far,
It's not going to
then
work.
well, it's going to slow them down,
Mm.
really. But you know what I've learned over the years is that I think when the track system, the the idea is to have a track system, right? So there's tracks leading to activity cells, which can be a pond, it can be a resting place, it can be a source of food, it can be a source of supplements, it can be all these things, shade, whatever. All these little activity spots where horses have whatever it is they want to do. And these tracks will lead there. But I think maybe we emphasize the tracks too much. I think what's important is that these animals have the freedom to move, that they can always go somewhere, have that freedom to move, and within that area in which they live, whichever is facilitated there in terms of forage, that it's not harmful,
Mhm.
that the environment is safe, that they can't get hurt there, and that they're with other horses, and that there's always food available. If you have those things, this freedom to move safely and the freedom to forage, what I see is that the horses become very much emotionally balanced. They become very relaxed. And if you have the right feeding stations if there's enough movement for them, you will also see their bodies build up and tone much more than in confinement,
So
normal confinement.
the key ingredient here to motivate the horses to move is enrichment, but not in the way that conventional horse owners would think about it, where they put, stupid little toys in the horse's box or mirrors or something like that, but integrating stuff from the wild into the artificial
Yeah.
uh,
And sometimes,
environment that you build. So can you give us a few ideas, like not everything, but a few ideas that people could integrate into their track system?
okay, well, it kind of depends on what the situation is, but you already have a paddock, you already have a stable, you already have a field, you have these things, but then you use them as different components. So one moment they're in the paddock, one moment they're in the field, one moment they're in the stable.
Yeah.
Now, maybe you can create a situation where the horse can actually move freely from that field to the stable, to the paddock, to the field, and back again in whatever way possible. The freedom to move and decide where to go and when to go. Then, if you can do something to that field that would limit the intake of all the green grass, then you're also addressing the issue of diet. So what you've changed then is then you went from a system where you are deciding where the horse goes and when, you've moved to a system where the horse can decide. And then within this system, you start using hay nets, for example, and place these around. Let's say you have one horse, which isn't preferable. You want to have more than one horse. Let's say you have 3 horses, and then you put out 9 to 12 hay nets that carry up to 10 kilograms of hay, and you place these around these areas that you've now created. Now, don't create solitary feeding stations. Create feeding stations where they can eat together. So you have 3 hay nets on one end, 3 hay nets on the other end, 4 hay nets over there, 2 over there. And then you give them a reason to not only travel around, but also do it together because horses like to be together and they like to eat together.
Yeah.
So that's another thing you need to facilitate. Sometimes you see track systems, horses are together, but then the feeding stations are all pulled apart. So
Mm.
there's one hay net over here, 100 meters down, there's another hay net, and then you're conflicting with nature again because you want them to be together.
Oh, that's very interesting. I didn't know that. And actually, I think we made that mistake in our own system, where we put the haynet poles a little bit too far away. I mean, of course, they understand when we bring fresh haynets and they start eating all together. But maybe we're interrupting what you said. They're biological
Well, it's a common
shared
mistake.
awareness.
Yeah.
And one thing that I sorry for interrupting you, but is really important here is, and I've noticed that in my paddock paradise, which is quite recently that we built it, was that this idea where you said you allow the horse to choose freely where he wants to be has a huge psychological impact, because
Tremendous.
if you look into people and animals with depression, or in animals they call it learned helplessness, the greatest factor is loss of control. If somebody cannot control his environment, like a situation where most people have been during the COVID pandemic, where they couldn't go out, they couldn't work, they couldn't do their hobbies, then you fall into a state of helplessness and depression. And I've noticed that my horses become more interested, more excited, more fun to be with, having this ability to choose and, you know,
And
make up their own schedule, their own time, and compare that to the conventional stable system. The horse has zero control over his life. He doesn't choose where he eats, where he plays, who he socializes with. I mean, there's zero social interaction anyway. And I mean, this is huge. It's
and also I will add to that because you're trimming horses as well, right?
yeah,
Right. So once you've had enough clients that put their horses on a track system, you want to get rid of the clients that put them in a field or in a box because the horses are so much different. Trimming a horse that's in a track system that's well managed, or trimming a horse that's in a field or in a box is, I don't know, it's a difference of night and day because the horse in a box, it's agitated, it's stiff, it's not cooperative. And then the horse in the field, something similar happens because they're eating too much of the good stuff, and
yes.
that doesn't make them feel too well either. So there's only benefits to it, but I understand there's also, to implement such a system when everything is so traditional, that's it requires a lot of groundbreaking work, and
well, since you mentioned it, people don't believe me when I tell them I have this portable grinder that I use. And I tell them I just go in the field or the paddock paradise, and the horses are free, and I just pick up their hooves. I look if there's something to grind and just do it. Go all the way around the hooves and finish, then go to the next horse. And I don't use ropes. I don't use cross ties or nothing. I just interrupt their schedule for a few minutes, once every 3 weeks, for example, and that's it. It's uncomparable to the fact that you have to take the horse out and cross tie, and it's full of energy, and he's scared. I wouldn't compare it, but okay.
No, it's uncomparable. It's very different. Yeah, I agree.
I don't know if you want to talk about. I mean, you mentioned a little bit about the stallions and things. I mean, I've noticed in my herd that probably a lot of issues that arrive are because we are lacking a stallion. I mean, we have mares and geldings, but there's this element of nature that's missing, which is the stallion. And I mean, imagine if you remove males from the human population, it's going to be a whole different society. So it's a whole different society, horse society in my setting. But what's your opinion on that? I mean, what kind of horses can live in the paddock paradise? And if you have some kind of advice, for example, recently we got two mules, and I was very skeptical about integrating into the herd, but luckily it went smoothly. But we had like 2 weeks of quarantine, or I mean, what's your philosophy around that?
Are you talking about how to integrate horses into a group, or the impact of stallions or males on?
Yeah, I mean, your whole idea on how the herd works. I mean, uh, this is also a very different idea that I've been struggling lately, that I can no longer remove a horse from the herd and go riding, or just have an owner bring me his horse for 2 weeks because he's on vacation, and then he can take it back, because I can
It
see,
disrupts everything.
yes, it ruins everything.
Yeah.
And what's your opinion on that?
Well, what's my opinion? I've been seeing these things for many years now. I remember seeing horses that are not even together, but are in the vicinity of one another, get completely bonkers and stressed because horses from another group are being removed. So you have a field, and then 500 meters down the road, there's another field with another group of horses, and those horses are being removed. And then the horses in the first field are getting stressed. So it tells you something about how they interact with one another, even if there's a distance between them, even if they can never touch each other or never really see each other, there is some sort of connection going. And I think the social structures of the horse are infinitely complex, and there's a lot of things I don't understand, but there's a lot of things that I see that have made me realize that, just to have them together is so important. And like you said, the males are a crucial part of, wild horse society. And you'd think it would have to be a crucial part of domestic horse society as well. But like we said earlier, this is very complicated. And the other complication is that we decide to put which horses go together. And we might think that they're a good matchup.
Yeah.
But they might not agree. But because they're horses and because they need each other, they'll probably cling to one another. But then the moment you bring in other horses, that group you always thought was together and bonded is suddenly not bonded at all. And they go like, bye-bye, I'm going to that guy because he's way more fun.
Yeah. I saw that at least 3 times in our small band of horses, which is just 8.
Yeah.
And one horse, which is the mare that I mentioned earlier, has not found a reliable partner except from her own baby, which, to mention another thing,
they can be critical as well. Stavros, these horses, the mares as well, they can be highly critical of who they want to hang out with. But going back to the males, the whole principle of pecking order or natural hierarchy, relative dominance, all these things are very difficult to discuss these days.
Yes. What's your take on that?
Well, I just did a podcast with a former student who is now one of my instructors, and she started debating me on relative dominance, which is fine, but it's a biological concept that has been proven again and again through the science of biology, that there is a pecking order among pretty much all animals, if not all. It's undeniable. You put 2 horses together, and in whatever shape or form they're going to do it, they're going to establish dominance. But the word dominance itself has such a load that people get all wired up about it, which I think is completely unnecessary, because the whole concept of relative dominance it's functional. It's functional because in order for the horse as a species to survive, then there needs to be a system in place where one is the leader, another one is a subordinate, but just because one horse is a subordinate to the other doesn't mean that other horse doesn't play a vital part in their society. They're all of equal importance. It's just like you can't say the diet is more important than having a track system or a good trim. They're all important. The moment you take one thing out, everything can fall apart. And it's the same in wild horse society or in horse society. If you remove the leader, well, first of all, they're going to find a new leader, but second, you're going to disrupt things. So it's part of their whole system. This is why you should never create these mare groups where there's just mares and groups where there's just geldings or stallions. Because the geldings and stallions, that is a natural thing. That's a natural occurrence in wild, but where it's just males, but not the mares. They get restless when there's no males around.
Yeah.
So yeah, their role, the role of the males, I think, is very important within the group.
Yeah, one thing I've noticed again and again was that mares, they almost never play.
No, rarely.
And I see the geldings. Of course, I don't have any stallions, but I see the geldings. They rough and tumble play like 2 or 3 times every day.
Yeah.
Especially if there's a drop in temperature or it's early in the morning, or they get excited because they see us coming or whatever. They do very wild play, and that's also a very important thing that you are missing if you are stabling horses in conventional way of stabling. And of course, there are people who are gonna say, they're going to get hurt, and they do get hurt. I mean, the other day, I have a Shetland pony, and his nose was all bloody from rearing up and playing with another male horse. But this is the equivalent of us going back home with blood on our knees, or you know what I'm saying. And if
brothers and sisters fighting.
Yeah, and if we had neurotic mothers that don't go outside because you're going to get hurt, then we would have missed such a huge part of our life, which is negotiating with other kids and learning how to play, how to give and take, how not to hurt someone, how not to go too far. And if you go too far, then the others will not play with you again. And I see all those things in the herd right now. And these people who are, acting like neurotic mothers on their horses, and I believe it goes back to their own childhood, and because they never learned how to play themselves. They see horses playing and they think that this is not playing, this is fighting. But they're not fighting, they're playing.
Yeah, well, I posted a little video on my Instagram story a couple of days ago of a couple of horses, stallions, that appeared to be fighting. It looked violent, but if you look closely, you could see that there was mostly play. One was more dominant than the other, but it was a playful affair. It wasn't, they were not trying to kill each other or something. I don't know what the reason. I don't know why horse owners fear the horses of being together. I don't know. Maybe it is their childhood. Maybe it is their upbringing. I just think that one of the problems that we have is that the horses become they're so close to us. It's like dogs and cats. They're part of human society, and we have totally lost the connection with the biology of the horse. We've lost the connection with our own biology, which is troublesome enough. Like you said, people get frantic over children having bloody knees and stuff, and runny noses and getting dirty. Go out there, get dirty, get blood on your knees, etc. And it's the same thing for the horse. And we start to look at horses in the same way that we look at ourselves. So we go to bed at night,
Yes.
we go to sleep.
Anthropomorphizing.
Right. And then we want a blanket because we're cold. And we want to put something on our face because we have a rash or something. And you know, if you for the horse, these things are very alien. They don't need a blanket because their coats are designed, you know, to go up and down with the weather and withstand rain and all that. And they don't go to bed at night. You know, they might rest a little, but they can also be very active during the night. And this all depends on the season, the amount of forage, you know, social pressures, whatever. There's a lot of reasons why horses move more or less during the night or during the day. This is why we shouldn't be restricting them too much. We should allow them to do the things they're good at, which is being a horse.
I'm gonna take you a little back to what you said about the interaction with the human and the loss of our biology and the connection with the horse. And I believe this is very crucial because reading the Paddock Paradise book and other pages online, I think it's obvious that there are many benefits for the horse. But what people have not really talked about, and it's only happens when you build it by yourself and you feel it, is the benefit it has for the human. I mean, this priceless experience that I feel every day when I go into the paddock and all the horses are coming to me just to greet me. I don't have any food. I don't have any, treats or anything. And, I get to scratch them and they make these funny faces. And then I see how they interact with each other. It's this experience of living with the herd that's priceless. And you are missing in a whole area of experiences and adventures having your horse in this sterile environment, just living in a box. I mean, the other day, I saw one horse, start pawing at the ground. He goes down, and then the other horse goes down, and then the other, and everybody went down immediately, which is something I heard someone call herd awareness. And I was there and I noticed that, and people are missing all these little cues that are so important in their interaction and also in their training and in their riding experience, because they got disconnected from the horse as a being, and they just look at it as a tool or a sport equipment. So I believe this system that is just a small percentage of nature brought into your own life, it has such a huge impact in your own psychology and mentality, which is priceless. I wouldn't exchange that for. I mean, I couldn't see again horses living in stables. I mean, it's like watching. I believe, was it Jamie Jackson or someone else who said that the horse riding school is the prison where every prisoner is innocent.
Yeah, I've heard that. I don't know who said it. Yeah, you're right. It is.
And it's actually this kind of question also, that.
And I agree with you. I wholeheartedly agree with you. But I think we need to be careful not to condemn the horse owners that are in situations that they can't change, or perhaps they haven't had the education on the things that are possible. And there's a lot of people out there who want it, and they don't know how to get it, how to do it, because they're restricted. And I agree. People need, if the moment people are introduced to it, because here I go to these clients, they want a Paddock Paradise, right? And oftentimes they're couples, because they bought a home somewhere and finally their dreams come true. They want to build a paddock paradise. So then there's the husband and the wife. Usually in Holland, the wife is the one that's riding the horses and doing stuff with the horses, and the guys just, they're along for the ride.
Oh yeah.
And usually they're not very interested, but the moment the track system is in place and they see what happens, then the guys become interested. They're like, wow, this is really nice. This is beautiful. I'll muck out the track. I'll feed the horses. And all of a sudden they become part of it because they're used to their lady friends or wives going to these livery stables with all these, people chatting, and it's a very different environment from having horses at home and having these horses relaxed being a horse.
Yeah. I don't know what's your experience or relationship with meditation and things like that, but for me, mucking out, walking around the track and picking manure and scratching the horses and just sitting there and watching, it's a practice of meditation, and this thing that's priceless.
Well, we've gotten to a point where we have other people mucking out the track, so I try not to do it too much. but I can understand where you're getting from, but I think it's with everything when you're working with a horse. I mean, you've probably experienced the same thing. If you're busy and if you're stressed, and then if you have to work with the horse, it's a terrible experience. But when you take your time, when you try to connect with the horse, when you reward the horse, when you establish relative dominance, when you're genuinely interacting with the horse, then the work becomes easy and becomes enjoyable. In fact,
yes,
if my back hurts or my tummy hurts or whatever, if I have a headache and I work with horses, it just goes away. So they have a very healing element to them, and even more so when you put them in an environment that is fitting for them. You see a lot of these. I don't know if you have the same in Greece. These care farms where they have, people with disabilities working with horses. Yeah. So for these places, the track system, the Paddock Paradise track system, is just perfect because the horses become so much more relaxed and balanced. The environment for the clients become much more suitable and safe. Plus, these clients can then work within that environment, caring for the horses, instead of having all these disruptive systems of taking horses in, taking horses out, mucking out stables, and then, it's not a circular system. Whereas a Paddock Paradise trick system is just it's an ongoing thing. It just moves along, and you just go with the flow. So there's a lot of upsides to it. You want me to mention the downsides?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you could start telling us about the daily responsibilities of the Paddock Paradise owner. I mean, you wake up, what do you have to do?
You have one job only. That is to facilitate to the horse. That's the only job you have. You need to, that's what I said earlier. You create the environment that is safe and allows freedom to move. Then your job is to spend your money on a high quality forage and make sure the horses have access to that 24/7. You muck out the track, you make sure it remains clean, and get out the horse's way. That's what you need to do. You need to provide and get out the way.
So,
and stop worrying about little scratches. Stop worrying about little this and little that, and I see this and I see that. Yeah. Don't do it. Create an environment that works, that is safe, and that facilitates, a more natural lifestyle. And then things become relatively easy.
So, hay nets.
I like how you use the word hay nets. A lot of people use the word slow feeder.
Slow feeder.
Yeah, which is a term I don't agree with. You see a lot of these hay nets.
Yeah.
you see a lot of these hay nets are being used as slow feeders. So the holes in the hay nets are made very small, so the horses will eat small quantities, don't get fat, and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Which leads to a lot of frustration within the
Yes, it does.
horse and probably problems in their teeth as well. So the quality of the forage is very important. And then in terms of hay nets, any feeding station should not be too big. So maybe a meter long, something like that. And these holes, don't make them bigger than 4 or 5 centimeters. Don't make them smaller than, 3, maybe 3.5 centimeters. The moment they get smaller, they lead to frustration. The moment they get bigger, it loses function.
Yeah. And would you like to tell us a little bit about why would you go this extra effort of filling up hay nets every day? What are the benefits?
Well, okay, so in a paddock paradise, one of the objectives, not the only one, but one of the objectives is to get the horses off the grass, or at least to minimize the intake of green grass, for the simple reason that the types of grasses we have in Europe, the quantities of grasses that we feed is not natural to the horse, and it creates problems. So this is something you want to eliminate. And if you have fresh grass, then you have a plant growing from the ground throughout the year, throughout the season. And this grass, in terms of content, will go up and down depending on temperatures, fertilizers, whatever. So it's a bit of Russian roulette when you put your horses on the grass, because it's very hard to determine what it's going to do to your horse. So when you have a horse on the grass year round, you will also see that their conditioning goes up and down. Most horses are most healthy during autumn and winter, because that's when all the sugar levels and all the energy goes down. So then the horse starts to relax. And then in spring and summer, problems start because the energy levels go up. So this is the problem with grass. Now, when you have a good quality hay, if you can manage the soil on which the grass is growing, and if you can manage the moment at which it's being harvested, when it's cut, then you have a conserved feed, basically, because you cut the grass, you dry it, and because you dry it, it becomes more coarse. It starts to look more like the natural fibrous material that horses eat in the wild. Plus, you've controlled that little piece of food you have there, and you know now what the content is, and that you can feed throughout the year. So year round, you have the same type of feed, rather than this grass that goes up and down in terms of energy and sugars and whatnot. So this is the reason why we make the effort of filling these hay nets every day and putting them out there, because that's what we're feeding them. It's hay, salt, some hay, and water. That's basically it.
So regarding salt that you mentioned, do you use these mineral blocks, or do you add salt in some
Mostly
other way?
just straightforward salt. Yeah.
And how would you go and feed that?
Oh, there's various ways of doing it. Sometimes you put them in a bucket somewhere, and anywhere the horse can reach it. You can hang them up, or wherever the horse can reach it, and where it doesn't. If possible, you could even put it in the ground somewhere, but that would only work if you're in an area where it's dry, because of course when it starts to rain, it will just wash out.
Okay. And do you go and feed anything else other than hay?
Not much. Not much. I might feed some oats. I might feed some, a little bit of vegetable or a little bit of fruit, but, handfuls, tiny bits, a little bit here and there. There's, the issue with feeding a horse is that we don't know what the horse needs. We don't know what quantity they need of what. We don't know anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I know there's a lot of people that would disagree with that. And I know there's a lot of feed companies that believe they're selling, the best of the best. But first of all, when you look at most of the feed bags, you see a lot of crap in there that horses do not need and cannot metabolize very well. And second, there is no research. There's research on what horses eat, but there's no research on what horses eat in a specific environment. For example, the Great Basin wild horses, we don't know what these horses eat exactly, how much of it, when they eat it, why they eat it, what it is they need. We're only making assumptions. And
have you read this book? Sorry for interrupting you. The Equicentral System.
I may have heard of it, but I don't think I've read it. Equicentral System, is that?
I don't know exactly if it's called exactly like that, but if you write Equicentral in the web, you'll get the results. And I thought in the beginning they are close to the paddock paradise idea, but instead they circulate between pastures, and the idea is that the horse naturally eats grass. So the problem,
yeah, I know what you mean.
When the domestic horse is not doing these fluctuations, so he's well fed in the winter, his belly is full, and then spring hits, the new sprouts come, and then that's why he gets laminitis. On the contrary, in the wild, the horse is already starved, and he gets very thin in the winter, and then when the spring comes, he gets in his natural condition.
Well, again, which wild horse are we looking at? That's important.
Yeah.
Because the wild horse does lose a bit of weight during winter time, but you also have to remember that their activity levels go down as well. They start to move less. They simply do less. And there's a lot of species who will gain and lose weight throughout the season, but it should be moderate, nothing excessive. A lot of assumptions are being made about wild horses, and often it's not about the wild horse in its adaptive environment. And you see now that there's a lot of systems coming out, that may reference paddock paradise, or create some sort of an alternative where they offer herbs and plants and grasses and
yeah.
Maybe it's probably a good thing. People need to experiment with these things, but what's problematic about it is that a lot of people don't know what a healthy horse looks like. And for sure, people don't know what a healthy foot looks like. And when you take the hoof of the horse, it's a beautiful mirror of horse health. So if you are absolutely positive and sure that the feet on your horse show no distortions, no diverging toe angles, no signs of laminitis whatsoever, nothing there, everything is honky-dory, then maybe you can experiment with some plants and stuff. But as long as you need to have some sort of template, you need to have something to start from, because the moment you start feeding this, that, the other supplement, if you start putting all these things together, then how are you ever going to figure out which of what is good for your horse? If a problem arises, how do you determine what's the problem?
Yes.
You will have to eliminate, but then what are you going to eliminate? So if I feed my horses hay and grass and haylage, and he's running into a problem, I don't know what the problem is, but I do know that I'm going to eliminate those things that I know could be problematic first. So first I remove the haylage, I remove the grass, and then see what happens. And then when things level out, then you can maybe experiment a little. You need to have a point of reference from which you argue that something is right or wrong. And I can understand where all these systems are coming from, but I do see that a lot is based on assumption and not on actual science or health, which is problematic, I think.
So, is there something else in the horse owner like schedule that you have to go an extra mile to do if you have a paddock paradise?
Well, I think the extra mile lies in making the change mentally, being willing to transition to this different view of caring for horses. I think this is the big thing. And second is being willing to make the investment that is needed to create this other environment. And you might have to pay more money to get a better quality hay, and you might have to invest in your track system in order to create a situation that is durable throughout the year. But other than that, it's pretty straightforward. It's pretty simple. Like I said, you facilitate something, you set it up in a way that works and can last, use the right materials, and then you're good to go. You might have some maintenance throughout the year, but other than that.
When I present this idea to some people, they tell me that, oh, my horse is so damn lazy. He's not going to do this. He's not going to go around and around, no matter how many tracks or paths I build for him.
Wow.
And for me, I tell them that if you think it's not going to work, look at the most successful furniture store in the world, which is IKEA. Mm-hmm. And what they do is they actually build something similar for the customer, where you go in, you probably have no idea what you want to get, what you want to buy. And you start venturing in these tracks where you go first to the kitchen station, then you go to the living room station, and then you remember, oh, I forgot something back there. Then you go and eat. And on the way out, you get an ice cream. And by the end, you have spent, I don't know, 100, 200 euros.
It's the IKEA track system.
Yes, where it's a happy experience. The customer goes out more poor in the pocket, but feels he had an adventure.
I'll remember that next time I go to IKEA. No, in a way, you're right. Yeah. But, also the simple thing is that your horse is going to get hungry. And their innate nature is going to, tell them to move. If people again, it's assumption based. People say all the wildest things about their horses, and, it just doesn't make any sense. Doesn't make any sense. If you start spreading out the hay nets, that horse is going to move.
Yeah, and a lot of times they move because somebody higher on the pecking order comes.
Of course.
They send them away, and then they have to go all the way around to come back to where they've been.
Yeah. So if your client says my horse is too lazy to move, say, okay, we'll put him in with some dominant horses. Let's see how long he lasts.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's that that view we have of horses that is a bit can't find the word, but it gets in the way of things. People have all these ideas about horses. You have to understand, horses have gone through evolution for millions of years.
Yeah, longer than us.
Longer than us.
And they've managed just fine.
The horse we have today, as a species, as its current shape or form, it's been walking around the earth for maybe 3 million years. They know what works.
Yeah.
All we have to do is understand their nature. Once we understand their nature and how it operates, then it becomes easy. You just look at nature as a blueprint, adopt things from it, facilitate, and the horse will manage. And this is also when you run into a problem with your horse, it makes things easier because then you can make a deduction and say, okay, well, I didn't have this problem before. What just happened? What changed? My girlfriend was having she was getting a rash here on the eyes and on her fingers. And she couldn't figure out what it was. I said, but you got contact lenses. She said, no, that's not it. And yesterday she came to me, she said, I found an article. It's the contact lenses.
Yeah.
I said, really? It's because the contact lenses are dipped into a fluid that contains conservatives that can cause a rash. Okay. So contact lenses, I know, have nothing to do with the horse, but I'm just saying something changed. One moment there is not a problem. The next moment there is a problem. Why is that? It's because something has changed. Something is pressurizing or pushing on the system. Something is pushing your horse to where something breaks. So if they get a rash, if they start feeling unwell, if their feet start to change, immediately start looking at what has changed and how it resonates or not with their biology. And then usually you can fix the problems.
I think the issue is that exactly as you said, that people are not well equipped to understand when there is pathology because they have come to a point where they have acclimatized or normalized the pathology.
Right.
And if you look all around the equestrian products where they have this picture of the hoof or this picture of the horse's body, in my eyes now, after seeing the wild horses, there is always a pathology there. But when they have a hoof oil product, for example, they have outside the hoof that is, too long or out of balance. But in the eyes of this marketing committee or the people buying this, it's a healthy hoof. And you have a horse living in a equestrian facility and he's showing you in his body all these signs of stress or both psychological and physical. But are you equipped to notice these ailments of the body and the soul?
Yes, and can you make a distinction between the various pathologies? Can you make a distinction between a symptom and causality? Because the fourth trimming principle that Jamie Jackson teaches is to ignore pathology.
Yeah.
Because the moment you start doing the right things for the horse, pathology eventually will go away. And the moment you start focusing on the pathology, then you start treating the pathology. And before you know it, you've gone from one place to the next and things are not improving.
For me, this was the breakthrough that Jamie Jackson did. He was trying to help horses, but he was looking around and he couldn't find things to read and things to colorate that would tell you what's wrong, because everything was breaking down, but the book said it's normal. This is how a frog should look like. Or the books were telling you what to cut, but not how to develop things. And this is where he realized that the only problem with every situation here is the human factor. That if you look at the horses in the wild, they are perfectly healthy with perfectly healthy hooves. If you look at the horses in the artificial environment, what changed? It's the human factor. It's the artificial factor. And people are so brainwashed that this is healthy that they couldn't figure out what's wrong. And this is the breakthrough that he said, where is the ideal model that we have to look and compare and see what's wrong with your hoof and what's wrong with the other horse's hoof? They didn't have any. I mean, I read a couple of books on horse care and hoof care and farriery from the 19th century, 20th century, and they didn't have a model, an ideal model, tell you this is how the hoof should look like. And this is the breakthrough. He went into the wild and he brought back this hoof and he told you this is how the hoof should look like. And
yes.
So how are you going to build that? Not
Exactly.
develop that.
Yeah, they're very good. Develop it. You need to cultivate the hoof. It's nothing you can force. Yeah, that's what he did. And he's not saying that his model is the only model, which is all often a point of critique where they go like, well, like this is the only, there might be other models out there, but this is the only valuable model that we have data on, and people should learn how to apply it and use it because it's I've you know I've seen so many results from it, and I've also seen failures, but the failures would always come from the human. I always say, any horse can go barefoot, but not any horse owner
Yes, exactly.
can do it. There's a difference.
I want to ask you just a general question, like which horses that show a variety of pathologies would benefit greatly from a paddock paradise system?
Say that again. Which horses?
Which horses that have developed some prominent pathologies?
You mean with what type of pathologies?
Yes.
You mean with what type of pathologies?
Yes, are going to benefit greatly from going into a paddock paradise system?
Probably all of them. If you look at ulcers are the consequence of, restricted feeding, timetabled feeding, lack of movement. The same with laminitis. Navicular is probably predominantly caused by riders, but the moment a horse can move freely on his bare feet, then something starts to happen. It's not just their feet, it's not just their emotion, but it's also their metabolism. Everything starts to operate more efficiently.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying it's going to cure every problem, but it will definitely improve, because the moment the body that encapsulates whatever the pathology is becomes stronger, then the pathology becomes less of a problem. It's like if you have a bad knee, you train the legs, the muscles in your leg, and the bad knee might not go away, but it will definitely improve if your legs become stronger.
Muscles will give it more support,
more stability. Yeah. So it's like I said, everything is integrated with one another. Every aspect is important. There's not one thing more important than the other. And this is the beauty of Paddock Paradise, because here you can put it all together. Like I said, you facilitate and let the horse figure it out. Don't micromanage.
Yeah. In your experience, what other animals could benefit or could coexist in a paddock paradise with horses?
Coexist?
Yeah.
Well, I think all ungulates could benefit from this system. In how they would all be able to interact with horses, well, you'd have to experiment with that, but I think most ungulates can get along together pretty well.
Here in Greece, it's very common to see horse owner who could not afford another horse to get a goat or a sheep. Right. They get along pretty well, I would say. And they get very connected. I mean, if you remove one from the other, they go crazy. Yeah. But, I've never seen them in an establishment like the one we're talking about, so I wouldn't know. And
I have to say, I don't see too much of it either. But I know that, once you put ungulates together, they'll somehow manage and create some sort of connection. But nothing beats animals of the same species put together. So I wouldn't advise on putting a goat with a horse in terms of being the right solution. A horse needs to be with a horse. Goat needs to be with a goat. But again, this Paddock Paradise track system, it's a way to get an animal to move around, and you'd have to look at the specific animal that you're interested in to see if something like a track system resonates with the biology of that animal.
I've heard that Jamie Jackson was writing another book on zoos, but it was many years ago, and I don't know, has he implemented this system on other animals, or do you know anything about
No. He wrote the book. Yeah, it's you can find it online, but it's just it's a hypothesis, and it most likely works, but he didn't implement it. As far as I know, he never implemented it anywhere. It's just a hypothesis on how it could work for zoos, because in zoos you have a lot of confined areas where they put the lions over here and giraffes over there, and that's, and in his book what he explains is if you can somehow integrate these different confinements with one another without putting the animals together, then the presence and the smell of all these animals that are near one another would, then create more natural behavior, would give an incentive for animals to be more active or move more. Or it's an interesting book. You should read it.
I definitely will, but was he promoting his idea of the paddock paradise for the zoo so that you could keep giraffes, for example, in a paddock paradise system, or was something completely different?
No, it's something similar. It's
okay.
zoo paradise. So, but of course, with paddock paradise, we're talking about the horse and burros.
Yeah.
Mules. You've got mules. So these you put together. But in zoo paradise, we can't put the lion with the giraffe. Well, we could, but it will only last like a day, and then So, but he created a template, something similar to paddock paradise, where these animals would near one another but not be with one another, and that would create more incentive to move and display natural behaviors, rather than a lot of these zoos. I mean, of course they all try to create an environment that is fitting to the animal, but it's some of it is not too good. Still a lot of zoos out there where you don't want to be there.
Yeah.
I remember the last time I was in a zoo, there was still a lion, a tiger in a pit there somewhere. Now this you don't see too often anymore, but it's that's not the type of environment you want for any animal, in captivity. You want to create something that is more natural.
Mm-hmm. Would you like to share screen and I show you a quick video of our paddock paradise, and then maybe we can wrap this up because we've been going for quite some time now. So give me a moment to figure this out. So this is an Arabian mare we have, and the Shetlandtonian. This is a place I'm keeping to maybe build an arena. And then we walk on the track. It's maybe 4 meters wide.
What are those posts outside? If you go back one.
Yeah, these ones.
No, the other ones, the big ones. Those tall posts you have. Those.
Yeah, it's outside the paddock paradise. It's just a place for us to sit. It's a hanging out area for us, for humans.
For humans.
Yeah.
What type of wood do you use in Greece? Is it a chestnut or?
I think it's oak.
Oak, really?
Oh no, chestnut. Yes, right.
Chestnut.
Yes, you were correct. And yeah, so we built this area with the
beautiful
sail shade. But we only hang it out for the summer. They have some shade.
Yeah.
This Shetland pony. Okay, there is a lot of wind in our area, but and I've noticed it has benefit because you don't have a lot of flies and mosquitoes.
Yeah.
But it's
If
quite
if you can go back,
yeah.
oh, that was a video. Oh, it's probably my internet. It's being. This is a video?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Oh, if you can pause it right here, can you pause
Yes.
it? So here you have a pole
Yes.
with a hay net on it, which
Yeah.
is great, but you've got the pole right up the fence. So
What do you think about that?
well, then what basically what you're doing is you're eliminating part of what this feeding station can do for you because it's the horse can only approach the hay net from one side. Whereas if you would move away from the fence, and like I said earlier, if you create an area where there's multiple posts that they can move around,
Yeah.
then it becomes more what's the word? It will create more incentive to move, and you will offer more variety in positions as well.
You know what my concern was that in some places, if you put the pole in the middle of the track, then it would obstruct their movement if they running and they have a pole in the middle of their
Yeah,
galloping track or something.
So this is why you would want to create these wider areas.
Yeah.
Where then so there's a track and then they come out of the track and then there's a wider area. And in this area you create a feeding station. And you do
so
it
you
in
wouldn't have feeding stations along the track.
No.
No.
The tracks lead to a feeding station.
Okay.
And then it leads to a resting area, and then it leads to a sheltered area, et cetera, et cetera.
Can I show you another video?
Sure.
So this here is a big resting area. There is no track or anything. We have here are some stones where we put some mineral blocks.
Yeah. So if you were to create a feeding station right in the middle of such a big area, then there would be no pressure on the horses coming from the tracks. That would work brilliantly. So this one's all right. This is nice.
Yeah, you can either go from the left or to the right. You go up, and they use it, and you didn't have to put some hay nets or anything to go up here. They just.
What type of soil do you have?
It's very rocky.
Is there clay as well?
It's not clay. It's not this red clay. And in the winter, it strains very well. We built this small shelter. And then we have also these track tires, and we put the hay nets there. And then my aesthetic is more like building small patches of closed fence, and then the horses can go around those instead of building these endless track lines that I've seen in some other paddock paradise. And these are the mules. And so they have areas where they can do what you said. They could go all around the feeding station, it's in company.
Yeah.
But it's very temporarily right now. We have to build something better for them.
Build what better?
These feeding stations. I mean,
yeah,
I wouldn't like it to be.
I would expand on that a little.
Yeah.
Try and experiment with that to have multiple feeding poles in one area. You've got plenty of space for that. See how they. So do the mules? Do they mingle with the horses or?
Just one or two. There was one horse that we took in our farm recently, and she was the one who banded with them very good. And her previous friend, he went back to his old friend when she started hanging out with the mules. So this goes back to what we were talking about, how the dynamics of the herd change all the time with every little things you change.
Mm-hmm.
And this is another place in our track system, and this is what I said, that I prefer aesthetically to be small patches of land and the track can go in between, instead of being just, you know, these endless tracks where they just walk and walk and walk, but there's not much they could do.
It all a lot depends on the size of your land, but this looks great, man. This is beautiful.
Anything you would change other than the feeding stations? I mean, I've seen online these small, how can I describe this? It's almost like a small house with a roof, and then they put the hay net inside. I was thinking something like that. If we could build 2 or 3 of those in the big resting areas.
I'm not sure exactly is that a shelter you saw from us or somewhere
No,
else?
I saw it on Pinterest or something. It's like a small house with a small roof, and then you have a big hay net in the middle, and then the horse could gather around them.
Like I said, create something safe, create something stimulating, and just facilitate to their needs. And if you can think of something that's more interesting, then do it. Beautiful. But the health or the workability of what it is you're doing will show up in your horse. If your horses are relaxed, if they're free of lameness, if free of disease, then you're doing a good thing. It's not very complicated, but it is important that you address the safety aspect. So always look at whatever it is that you're creating for your horses. Is it safe for them? Can they not obstruct one another or corner one another? For example, I gave early in this interview, I gave the example. You asked me for an example. I said, let's say you have a stable and a paddock and a field, and you create something within that, right? Mm-hmm. So you use that stable as a place that they can go to when they want to go there. That can totally work. But you do have to keep in mind that the moment your stable only has one entrance and you have 4 or 5 horses, that means one of your horses could get
stuck,
cornered by a horse. So always make sure they have multiple exits. Always walk through your track, walk through whatever it is you have, and look at it from the perspective of the horse, because the horse will just think it's his environment. And if there's a dangerous object, they will go around it. No problem. But the moment they panic or flee or whatever, they might not see it, and did you go through it? So you have to think for them and think ahead.
Yes, this is really important.
Yeah.
To generally think outside of the box. I mean, I had a video a couple of years ago showing to the people here in Greece how to, knit your own hay net. And it went well. People watched it and asked me questions and stuff. And then I've seen people starting to build these huge hay nets so they could put the whole bale inside, so they could have just one feeding point, and their job is easy and done in a few seconds. Okay. But if you really think this through, this is pretty boring for the horse, and it has some, instead of having health benefits for the horse, it does the opposite, because they stand in the same position all day. Some horse who is lower in the pecking order is not getting any food because the other ones don't allow it. That's why it's so important to do what you said. Just think it from their perspective. Is this going to really work for them in the long term?
Yeah.
And one last question: what do you do regarding deworming? I see this pretty often with.
Well, actually, this morning I was emailing with an assistant professor of University of Kentucky, I think, who's the guy's Danish, and I'm going to have an interview with him on parasites because he's an expert. My take on it is this: all horses, like all humans and other animals, we all carry parasites. It's a normal thing. When parasites get out of control, you will definitely have to treat it because you don't want the animal to suffer from, whatever it is that got it to be infested with the parasites. But if you disrupt the parasite cycle, then the problem goes away. And the moment you put your horses on a track system where there is no grass, so there is no larva going inside the grass into the horse, into the manure, and back into the grass again, if you disrupt the cycle in that way, the parasite problem goes away. And if you don't feed all these sugary feeds to your horse that the parasite loves, then the accumulation of parasites will not happen either. So in essence, I don't do anything in terms of parasite control. I haven't dewormed my horses in, I don't know, 15 years. And I don't have to because they're not at risk of, having parasites accumulate within their bodies. It's just.
And what about getting a new horse?
Well, same thing. They can't, as far as I know, they can't contaminate the other horses. I mean, they can leave feces that have parasites, but unless your horse decides to eat the feces, which occasionally happens, the risk of being contaminated with those parasites is very small. But definitely check, and if there's a problem, then treat it, but don't do it preventively. Always make sure there is and this is something I want to discuss with this guy because I've heard there's some debate about whether or not egg counts are trustworthy or not. Keep in mind, we don't know how many parasites the horse carries naturally. We have no idea. There's no research on it. So we're just guessing, right? But I would be careful when you...
but the horse in nature is not standing around his own manure all day long, so it's
no, and you have to understand if the horse is living, or any animal, if an animal.
What I'm trying to get down to this is that if we imitate nature in a certain way, maybe this deworming schedule that comes from the conventional equestrian world maybe is not suitable for our.
But these deworming schedules, they're starting to disappear. In Denmark, you need a prescription from a veterinarian to get a dewormer. In Holland, in theory, it's the same, but I can still pick up the phone and get a prescription. But you cannot buy dewormers in the store anymore.
Was that because of COVID and people buying?
No, I don't think so. You do know that ivermectin is one of the most used and most accomplished drugs in the world. So that thing that happened during COVID, where people went wild on ivermectin, like being a horse drug, it's being used on humans for years. Anyway, I think you don't need much of control over parasites if you create the right environment. But if you need to administer some sort of dewormer, then do take into consideration that it might affect your horse. If the horse is weak or not very stable, and you administer a vaccine or a dewormer, you could have that horse go into full-blown laminitis. I've had numerous occasions where this happened, where for some reason the horse is out of balance. It's not doing well. Maybe it was eating too much grass, or it's been stressed or whatever.
Compromised.
It was compromised. Its health was compromised somehow already. And then when you add something into its metabolism, it could result. I'm dealing with a horse right now, went into acute laminitis some time ago when it had its vaccination. It got vaccinated during springtime, and it wasn't doing too well. And then the vaccination just pushed them over the edge because it's a disruptive that goes into the metabolism. And the same could happen with a dewormer. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I'm always careful with putting something inside the horse's body when I know the horse is already not doing too well.
Yeah.
Anything you put on the skin, anything you put orally or anally, whatever you put into that horse, it's gonna go through all these barriers and go inside the metabolism of the horse. So be careful.
All right. I think we've been going for quite some time. And
yeah, we're at 2 hours.
Yeah. It's
good. It was fun.
Yeah, it's going great. I could talk to you for
maybe
hours and hours.
we should organize something in Greece. I haven't been there in years.
Absolutely. Have you been here before?
I've been to some of the islands. Yeah, I've been to Santorini. I've been to Kos. I've been to wherever I've been. I've been to several places. I love Greece, but I haven't been to the mainland actually.
Definitely.
Well, we're in the process of setting up courses everywhere. I know. I mean, you're a trimmer yourself. I don't know if we're doing the same thing, but could be interesting. Maybe a collaboration of some sort. Always open to it.
Me too. I'm always open to collaboration, and it's especially important for me for the people here to start getting information also from people outside of Greece. On different perspective, different ideas. So even though I sometimes act as a link between these, two different worlds, it would also be interesting for someone to actually come here.
Yeah, in my experience, it works very well because someone is not from there. It's much easier for me to do a talk outside of Holland than it is in Holland. I don't know why, but the moment you're not from that area, then it's different for people. They listen more, or I don't know. But hey, this was a good talk. Let's do it again sometime.
Last question: if somebody wants,
you've said that a couple of times already.
Yeah, sure. But this is about you. So if somebody wants to get in contact with you, where can they do that? Where can they?
Well, just send a message to Bjorn at paddockparadise.eu, and you'll get there, or info@paddockparadise.eu. Like I told you before, the Academy website is not online yet. We only have the landing page, which is paddockparadiseacademy.com. People can download.
I've noticed you have a popular Facebook page. And
oh yeah, that one's pretty big.
Yeah.
And it's been around for some time. So we're in the middle of creating this platform where we're going to offer some courses and clinics and training programs and stuff. So keep an eye out. And if people want to, they can go to the paddockparadiseacademy.com. There's an audio book there they can download for free. And well, like I said, 2 websites coming out. So right now I can't show you anything new, unfortunately. But
awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Have a great day.
Okay.
Thank you.
Talk soon. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.